Chapter 20. Hello? Aranya said with a tentative smile as a man with a short-trimmed beard and arms the size of tree trunks came hurrying through the camp.
Yes,
he said, stopping briefly. What is going on?
There was a breach in the fortress. They recovered the princess.
Oh, what a relief. This was far better than what they'd expected. And the other wielders? They're recovered too? He shook his head briskly.
Oh no. We've only just confirmed that they're imprisoned in the fortress.
But if there's a breach?
Asked Delon.
A small breach. A very small breach. Not enough for us to launch another full-scale attack. I need to go. We're preparing in case of retaliation.
With that, he strode off, vanishing back into the commotion of wielders. Campfires dotted the forest, stretching farther than she could see clearly at this hour. They cast the busy wielders in relief, rendering them shadows and silhouettes as they moved like wind through the night. Tents were set up near the fires. One in particular caught her attention. Not because of the tent itself, but who stood outside it. A young, slight woman lifted its front flap to enter. Her hair fell unbound to her hips, and blood smeared her garments. But something made her pause and look over her shoulder, straight at Aranya. Princess Mei Ling. A pair of lovely eyes met Aranya's, set in a sweet, soft-featured, and very dirty face. She was covered in filth from head to toe. Despite that, there was something about her bearing. Something different. Why had Fong wanted the cursed princess? The girl ducked inside her tent and shut the flap behind her.
This is a much more substantial force than I expected,
said Delon, surveying the campsite.
The Emperor must have ordered every fighting wielder on this side of the mountains here. They must be planning a full-scale attack.
A hand landed on her shoulder. She turned to find Kai nodding toward a figure in conversation with another wielder. Immediately, she recognized him from her academy days as one of the prestigious men leading the Emperor's armies. Lieutenant Jadala, she breathed. He must be leading this. I wasn't expecting someone so high profile to have been sent here on our recommendation.
We may not be the only reason they're here, Delon said. Our reports likely agreed with intelligence from other search groups. No doubt the princess's capture played a significant role. His Imperial Majesty probably wanted to burn the entire empire down to get his daughter back.
In the half-light of the encampment, Delon's face was hardened, its edges chiseled. He looked like the seasoned warrior he was, his stocky form all power and muscle. He almost seemed like a different person than the one who had only hours before complained of being a babysitter.
Tether your horses.
When the lieutenant finished his conversation and they had watered their mounts, Delon strode toward him. Aranya followed close at his heels, Kai behind her.
Lieutenant Jadala,
said Delon with a respectful bow.
Lian Delon, from Suguan Secret Services. My comrades, Sun Aranya and Shikai. Very well, very well.
The lieutenant was a man of hard lines, with an extended brow and a sharp nose, a cut jawline. His eyes were slightly wide-set, angled, and stern.
I fear I am busy at the moment, ensuring all lines of pursuit are cut. Of course, we are merely reporting for your service. When the threat has been neutralized, wonderful, I shall meet with you in the morning, circumstances permitting. Now, if you would not mind excusing me.
The lieutenant strode off, leaving Delon grinding his jaw behind him.
Never liked him, he grumbled. Let's finish with our horses. Then I might see if the lieutenant is in a better mood. I need to tell him about how we saw Fong.
Kai sat outside the tent he'd been offered. People milled about, despite the late hour, but everything had calmed down since their arrival. Extra scouts patrolled the area, ready to warn them should anything change. Aranya and Dalan had long been asleep, and he found it strange that he didn't long for his comfortable bed in Sushui, but rather the nights under the open sky. He'd grown rather used to being able to glance to the side and see Aranya sleeping soundly, her mouth hanging open, and hands clenching her blanket in a death grip. He swallowed, running his hand down his face. He ought to go inside the tent, to wrap himself up in his own blanket and sleep. After all, he was quite sleep-deprived. But his eyes would not close. For weeks now, the only thing that could chase away his anxiety about his family was Aranya. And she was another source of anxiety herself. Not that she knew that. Your surname is Shi? Kai started, his gaze shooting up to the figure staring down at him. How had he been so lost in his thoughts that someone had approached him without his notice? How often had he teased Aranya about how good warriors never startle? The man before him was, oh, Spitfire. Lieutenant? Kai barely managed to control the surprised timbres of his voice. He stood, bowed, and arranged his features into respect. He was taller, but when he tilted his face downward, it forced his eyes to look up. It made the person he spoke to feel taller, a trick he'd learned to get out of trouble at the academy. Your surname is Shi? The lieutenant repeated, face impassive. Yes, sir. Shi Kai, at your service. From Gabe? His frown deepened, eyes roaming over Kai's travel-soiled robes and the belt of weapons he had yet to discard for the night. Son of Shimu? The same. The lieutenant's pupils sparked, his mouth curving upward. His thumb looped around his belt, resting dangerously close to the knife sheathed there. How interesting to find you here. Kai's heart quickened, his mind racing to understand the implications behind his words. Did you know my father? You might say I did. You have a brother, Xiyong. The purest line of evanescers in Zhening Hai, Purest line known? At this, the lieutenant gave a dry chuckle. And yet, every single one has declined an appointment in the Secret Services. Until now.
Chapter 21.
Your mother is the only person I ever knew to not accept any appointments, said Lieutenant Jadala. Kai kept his movements reserved, nonchalant, but inside, his heart raced. Alarm bells blared. Questions bubbled at his lips. But he wouldn't lose control of himself, no matter how dread slid down his spine. I did not know my family had such an honorable connection in yourself, he said. The lieutenant gave a rueful snort. It has always been a bit one-sided. Pause. Then, tentatively, Kai asked, I beg your pardon? That hand, looped so casually on his belt, moved subtly, easily, to trail absently along the hilt. Kai tried not to look down and watch its leisurely motions. Instead, he kept his eyes firmly fixed on the lieutenant who was clearly threatening him. And there was only one reason he could think of as to why. What made you decide to join the Secret Services now, boy, after your family shunned them? I was summoned. I could not decline. But you wished to decline. Kai hesitated, but opted for honesty. I did. No explanation as to why? It would be so easy to extricate himself from this conversation by vanishing, but that would only complicate matters in the future, and potentially get him into deep water. These were the sort of questions that gave Kai headaches to think of an evasion for. One misstep, and he revealed his family dynamic, which would solidify his death sentence. If he refused to answer, he would look guilty of whatever the lieutenant suspected him. I was content with my appointment, he answered finally. What was your appointment? I was a warden at Zushui Ward Post. A warden? Fathers have mercy. You cannot be serious. Kai hoped his silence was answer enough. And, pray, what was so delightful about your wardenship that made you desire it over the secret services? I don't like long hours, fighting monsters, and getting little sleep, Kai answered, with more bite than probably wise. And the injuries can be quite bothersome. The lieutenant laughed outright at that. Perhaps you take more after your mother than I expected. I do not, Kai snapped. Instantly, he regretted the words and the tone. Forgive me, he muttered, lowering his head. His chest burned and rage simmered in his lungs, but he swallowed the emotion threatening to overtake him. The lieutenant was silent. He tilted his head. When Kai glanced up, the lieutenant's eyes pierced his, and Kai let all the fire in his soul blaze out of his own in return. Smart? Probably not. But he'd already blown his cover of being ignorant and dismissive. Might as well answer the man's unspoken question, the one he was fishing so tediously for. I'm not sure how you're connected to my family, or what you want from me, Kai growled, but I'm innocent of whatever you're insinuating. You are, came the mock reply. I became a warden to cut ties with them. His eyebrow rose, and the tilt of it gave the impression that he was somewhat convinced. So you know why I'm interrogating you? I do not, though I have my suspicions. He chuckled. Has anyone ever told you that you'd make a good politician? What did he mean by that? Kai bit back his sharp retorts, and instead said, I'm afraid not. It was also beside the point, and he was growing wearier with every minute that this conversation continued. Let me understand this then. By having you here, I am not risking the lives of these good warriors, nor am I compromising the integrity of this mission. Kai's blood hummed in his veins, his throat turning dry, but he said, You are not. And you understand that if I suspect any foul play on your part, I can ship you straight back to Suguan for trial. Kai's jaw clenched, but he only nodded. In that case, said the lieutenant, lifting his chin and squaring his shoulders, I have a mission for you, Evanescer. You are to infiltrate Feng Zedong's fortress, catalog its weaknesses, and report to me the state of the place after our first attack and this subsequent rescue. I especially want to know if he has replenished his supply of phoenixes. Kai blinked, forcing back terrifying memories. His supply of phoenixes? He had some 8 to 12 of them guarding his fortress. Our casualties from those beasts alone cost us too dearly on our first attack. You must tell me if there are more. When shall I go? Now. Now! Now. Why hadn't he sat up inside his tent, instead of being so available outside it? So much for getting any sleep tonight. I want to strike back as quickly as possible, now that they are weakened. I expect a report back by first light, the lieutenant said. Trying to not look as sour as he felt, he swept a professional bow and said, As you command. The lieutenant gave a sniff, then turned to leave. That was it? He wasn't going to tell him anything else about his connection to his family? Annoyance doubled in Kai's breast, enough that he asked, How do you know my family? The man turned, and for a second, all Kai could see in his eye sockets were the dancing reflections of firelight. Then he twisted his head more, and pools of black replaced the fire. He smiled mirthlessly. One might call it my hobby, though my wife calls it my obsession. Every spare moment I'm not serving in the military, I'm working to bring down the hidden ones. Kai's jaw sagged, his lips parting. Lieutenant Jadala gave a clipped, and left, disappearing into the night from whence he'd come. Kai stood motionless outside his tent for a long moment. Then he clamped his mouth shut, glanced upward at the moon inching across the sky, and swept aside the tent flap to duck inside. There were little preparations to be made, only changing his clothes so his stench didn't betray him and fully arming himself. His heart wouldn't slow its unsteady, jolting rhythm, despite how he told himself it wouldn't be terrible. He could leave whenever his life was threatened. He was trained and skilled. The errand wouldn't even take the whole night. There was no reason to wander over to Aranya's tent and say goodbye. Clenching his jaw, he pulled out his last knife, inspected the blade, and then returned it to its sheath. There. He was ready. He evanesced.
When Aranya hesitantly stepped outside of her tent the next morning, she breathed a sigh of relief that nothing terrible had happened during the night. The camp remained as it had been, with people eating around fires and— wait, were they drinking tea?
Aranya!
She turned, spotting Delon approaching, hands full of a steaming bowl and cup. Grinning, she scurried over to him and eyed the breakfast. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her mouth watering so much she was nearly drooling. He shoved them toward her.
"It's for you. I've already eaten."
"You brought me breakfast?" she cried, definitely far too elated this early in the morning as she sat down. "I can eat this?"
Yes, goodness gracious. Eat."
She could hardly be spared to think of anything else as she stuffed her face, savoring the heat of the tea. It was the blandest drink she'd ever had, yet the best tasting of her life. A sudden thought made her pause mid-chew. "Where's Kai?" Delon frowned.
"He's not here. I met with Lieutenant Jadala earlier this morning to debrief about our intelligence and understand what we've missed. He said he's already sent Kai off on a mission."
Gruel stuck in her throat. She swallowed hard. "What? A mission?" He shrugged, but his brow was unusually pensive.
"He sent him to Fong's fortress and told him to scout it out. Typical of him to do so without as much as a warning to me."
"Kai is in the fortress right now?" she cried, forgetting the food she held in her lap. "As in, this very instant? How long has he been gone? How do we know he's not in trouble? Couldn't he be hurt?"
"Shh, don't fret. He's only been gone a few hours, or so the lieutenant tells me. And you know Kai. Even if he should encounter harm, he'll evanesce back here in a heartbeat. It's just the sort of task that he ought to be doing."
The last words were spoken more begrudgingly than Delon probably intended. "If Kai is busy, then what are we to do? How did your meeting with the lieutenant go?"
"We're to prepare for another attack. Our intelligence confirms everything they've been suspecting, and with last night's rescue, it's been further confirmed that the remaining imprisoned wielders are in Fong's fortress. At this point, our task is to level the fortress and rescue the prisoners."
"Easier said than done, I'm sure," she muttered as she returned to her breakfast.
"Indeed. Once Kai returns, a plan will be formulated with the information he collected. Then we attack."
"What else did the lieutenant say? What have we missed? How long have they been here? Where is the princess?"
"The princess has already left with enough forces to guarantee the safe journey back to Suguan. As for what else we missed, there was a rather large and rather devastating battle against the fortress not long ago. Apparently Fong had a force of phoenixes to do his bidding, along with an army of barbarians and brigands."
"Battle? Phoenixes? Brigands? What do you mean he has an army of brigands? That doesn't seem possible. Brigands are just brigands. There's no such thing as an army of them." She well remembered the illusionist and the other brigands he was with. But they had seemed like a small, specialized group. The entire kidnapping brigade they discovered couldn't have been more than a dozen brigands. So why did Delon say Fong had an army of brigands?
"Apparently he has a significant army of them," Delon replied, shrugging. which means the entire fortress is armed to the teeth with magic, monsters, and enough manpower to decimate anyone who tries to breach it."
This statement made Aranya bite her lower lip, glancing away from Delan. She picked out a groove in the edge of the wooden bowl, then scratched her ear and huffed.
"What?"
Delan asked. She stood, taking her dishes with her. Seems like a dangerous place for Kai to be. Chapter 22. Noon came and went. Aranya busied herself with sharpening her knives, procuring another Xiyong — how many had she gone through on this mission? — and testing its sights, brushing down her horse and giving it the extra care it had missed over the last few weeks. Kai didn't come back. Lieutenant Jadala instructed everyone to be prepared for battle at a moment's notice, but as the day dragged on further, she took advantage of the time to risk a visit to the river and wash out her spare sets of clothes. The afternoon waned. Aranya deemed her cloak filthy and, despite having already made a trip to the river, went again. She scoured the offending garment so hard she rubbed her palms and the tips of her fingers raw. The other side of the river was enemy territory, and Delan grew fussy with how long she worked on the shore, so he came and paced behind her while she worked.
"There could be archers, you know," he growled. "I'm sure that garment is clean enough."
"They haven't shot me yet," was Aranya's returning growl. She cast a glare up at the fortress. The foliage surrounding their camp was too dense to see it, but from here she had an almost unobscured view of the hilltop and the stronghold atop it. Eventually, Delan succeeded in dragging her away from the river and back to the camp. She pulled her Xiyong out again, and after thumping the string a few times, decided it needed to be restrung. Despite having done this hundreds of times, she snapped the string the first 2 times.
"Easy,"
said Delan from the other side of the fire.
"What did it ever do to you?"
She leveled a glare at him and shifted one hand into talons to slice through another length of rope. The sun set, taking with it the warmth of the day. Aranya's cloak was still drying, so she ignored how cold her fingers grew as the evening stretched long. Delan eyed her much of the time, constantly following her non-stop movements, but she ignored him too.
"I'm sure he's fine," he said gently. "It's a big fortress. He probably had too much to cover in a day."
She huffed out a huge sigh. "I know he's fine."
"Good,"
Delan replied skeptically. She didn't have time for his rubbish. She shot to her feet, scooped up her Xiyong and a quiver of arrows. "I'll be back. Just going to make sure the sights are aligned properly." Stopping for no one and not even bothering to smile when other wielders made eye contact, she marched through the camp until she was a ways beyond it. Not too far that she couldn't call for help, should the unlikely happen, but far enough that she wouldn't be bothered. Skewering her cloth target to a tree with an arrow, she loaded her weapon with 2 arrows and took aim. She stared down the sights, leveling the weapon at the center of the target. Her finger brushed the trigger. Growling, she yanked the weapon down, pulled out one of the arrows, and then lifted it again. The balance unsteadied, its weight pinched. But instead of being a hindrance, it was a challenge. She took aim, compensating with her hand for the lack of a second arrow. Exhaled. Then she pulled the trigger. The arrow went wide, lodging in the bark next to the target. Faster than breath, she reloaded and shot again, this time without her hand bracing the frame. It missed the tree altogether. Over and over again, she reloaded and shot. By the time she'd run out of arrows, she was hitting the target every few shots. Never the center, but it was an improvement. Perhaps she should have taken care to not stomp so loudly in the underbrush, but she didn't care. She stormed to the tree, collected the arrows, and then went fishing in the vicinity for the wayward ones. After a few minutes, she grew impatient and abandoned the 3 she couldn't locate and trekked back to her spot. Load, shoot, load, shoot. The movements cleared her head, focused her soul. She let the thrill of the whooshing arrows flood her veins, let it overcome all other thought. Load, shoot, load, shoot. It wasn't that hard to shoot 1 arrow from a Xiyong. The masters who always cautioned against it likely had never tried to learn. She varied which shot she inserted the arrow into, purposefully throwing herself any time she grew too comfortable or believed she was starting to get it. Instinct. Shooting 1 arrow from a Xiyong was pure instinct. The more she actively tried to compensate for the missing arrow, the worse she shot. But if she kept herself from thinking too carefully, if she let her training overtake her limbs and hone the minutiae shifts of her muscles, it wasn't too hard. Load, shoot, load.
I've heard shooting 1 arrow from a Xiyong too much will permanently damage the calibration of the weapon.
Aranya whirled on her heel, flinging up her Xiyong before her. "You!" she cried. The strain of the day poured out of her, and her finger quivered on the trigger. Quivered with rage.
It leads to irregular wear and tear, and after too long, it will shoot as unreliably with 2 arrows as with 1. It's almost dark anyway.
Xiyong stood not 5 paces away, his long hair falling over his shoulder as he leaned against a tree, ankles crossed and hands on his hips. Instead of the gaudy, colorful gold-edged silk she'd last seen him in, he was dressed in practical but luxurious black. The cut was tailored, the hem shining with silver thread. He grinned, twilight glinting off his incisors. "What are you doing here?" Aranya bit out, setting the sights directly on his chest. Then she grinned wickedly, matching his. "Should I add another arrow? Make sure it shoots straight?" He vanished and apparently guessed her expectation that he would appear behind her. Instead, as she spun to attack him, he reappeared next to her and grabbed her jaw, yanking her backward against his chest and forcing her head up so he could smile and say to her face,
"That won't be necessary."
She fired the Xiyong over her head, the wind from the shot blasting her forehead. Xiyong moved too quickly, anticipating her move. While she was off balance, he vanished and reappeared, knocking her Xiyong out of her hands. Snarling, she shifted her hands into talons and ducked, avoiding his next blow. She leveled a blow of her own, but he deflected and caught her wrist, avoiding the lethal bite of her talons. He yanked her toward him, his free hand coming at her face. She hurled her weight to the side, dislodging his grip on her wrist and landing a hefty kick to the side of his knee. He grunted in pain, staggering before vanishing. He did not immediately reappear. "Have you followed us?" she growled, bracing herself and brandishing her talons. She stayed low to the ground, half crouched as she circled in place, waiting for him to appear and strike.
"Actually, no,"
came the reply from behind a nearby tree. The moment her knife hit the side of the tree, the shadow she'd seen behind it vanished.
"Let's just say this was a happy coincidence."
"The happiest of coincidences, actually," she replied, baring her teeth in a grin.
"The sentiment is mutual."
His voice came from the opposite side of the clearing. Another of her knives whizzed through the air. From her left,
"Your aim is impeccable, even if you're too slow."
"Your brother likes my aim, too."
"Does he now? Is that the only thing he likes?"
"He likes it when I don't talk all day." This earned a bright, surprised laugh.
"I think he likes it when I don't talk all day as well. Look at us, Aranya. So alike. Are you out of knives yet?"
Thunk.
"Apparently not."
"Why are you here, Xiyong? What coincidence brought you to the edge of enemy territory?" Silence. Now that she was out of knives, save one, she watched for that telltale shadow, barely visible in the oncoming night. If not for the rising moon, she wouldn't have seen him at all. But there, behind that thick trunk, was the edge of a black robe. As carefully and quietly as she could, she eased her way closer.
"I'm surprised you haven't already guessed it,"
came the reply from behind the tree she approached.
"Fascinating to me that you say we are so close to enemy territory. I don't think you know what a true enemy is."
Aranya barely contained her snort. Just a little bit closer. Xiyong appeared right in front of her.
"Looking for me?"
She punched at him, her talons plunging for his face. With a swift arc of his arm, he deflected her blow and flipped her onto her back. She let out a furious cry, rolling to get to her feet. But before she could get her feet under her, he pounced onto her. "No, no, no!" She writhed, bending her knees to avoid the position he was trying to maneuver her into. But his feet wrapped around the insides of hers, keeping her legs apart so she couldn't stand. She went to roll, but as she pushed up with her arms, his hand slid underneath and yanked her elbow back toward his belt, his other hand pressing painfully into the space between her shoulder blades as he forced her torso to bend and kept her legs pinned.
"There. Now we can talk,"
said Xiyong between pants.
"Why is Kai in the fortress?"
"How do you know he's there?" she gasped through her clenched teeth, trying to shift herself into a more favorable position. He wrenched her arm back so hard she cried out.
"I asked you a question, love."
Something about Xiyong always brought out the part of her that loved to play with fire and provoke a fight. She couldn't help her ridiculous giggle as she returned, "And I asked you a question, darling." With that, she stabbed at his thigh with her talons. He was fast, but not fast enough to prevent one of the sharp tips from ripping his robes and drawing blood. Furiously, he shoved her face into the dirt.
"I don't like repeating myself, but for you, sweetness, I'll oblige. Why is Kai in the fortress?"
Each panting breath was so full of dust she choked, panic seizing her with iron bands around her lungs, letting her tilt her head and gasp for clean air. "Why would I tell you anything if I don't know what you will do with that information?" she growled. "Why do you care? He's not coming back with you, if that's what you want to know. You can't make him come back."
"Even if I closed your pretty eyes forever?"
"Seems to me like that would work against you."
"Why? Tell me, son Aranya, does my brother harbor any tender feelings toward you?"
"Nope. Not unless flirting counts. And I don't think it does, considering he flirts with every female that walks on two legs." He chuckled, another surprised reaction.
"It seems his taste has changed from pretty idiots to pretty tigers."
"I don't think his taste discriminates much."
"Such a high opinion of the one you're suffering to protect."
Aranya rolled her eyes, huffing out a breath. "I'm having a hard time understanding you, Xiyong. You follow me hundreds of li and assault me, but you have yet to truly hurt me. It's as if you need something from me, but you're too scared to say exactly what it is."
"Too scared? I've been
asking veiled questions. Now ask me what you want to know and then get off me," she snarled.
"Very well,"
came his growling reply above her ear.
"I want to know what Kai was looking for in the fortress."
What he was. Suddenly, it all made sense. Chapter 23. Every last piece that had been puzzling her for months fit into its proper place. With clarity came rage. Xiyong relaxed his hold on her legs, so she bent her knees, broke the hold, and got one foot under her. Xiyong fought to regain control, but she used her free hand to push up and roll herself opposite the direction he expected. The result was strain on her pinned shoulder that was so acute she gasped. But then, with lightning-quick maneuvers, she had him pinned. His height and weight advantage forced her to leverage her bare gain with every trick she'd learned at the academy. His sleeve on the arm she pinned had ridden up during their fight. Enough for her to see the tattoo on his inner wrist. A 9-tailed fox, the tips of its tails curling into smoke with the crown resting atop its head. A tattoo Kai did not have. "You were in Fong Sedong's fortress," she seethed. He wasn't vanishing away from her grip, making premonitions trail like chips of melting ice down her spine. "You were there because you're working with him. You supplied the army of brigands he now has at his disposal. Traitor!" "I guess Kai did tell you then about our little family business." His grin, his huffs of laughter, sent shivers down to her toes and anger burning through her blood. "And you saw Kai. Where is he? Why hasn't he come back?" "Because Fong got a hold of him, that's why. And I can't rescue him." Despite the sudden terror that clenched around her heart, she wrenched his wrists tighter. Aside from his sharp intake of breath, he gave no sign of pain and did not fight her. "What is Fong going to do to him? And why aren't you glad for it? Shouldn't you be thrilled to have your birthright back?" "Fathers, he told you more than I expected." "Answer me." "The inheritance will never be mine. My beloved father made sure of that in the terms of the inheritance. As for Kai, I don't know what Fong intends to do to him. I found him, and we had a nice conversation, and then Fong arrived and restrained him." "A conversation that looked like ours?" she spat. "Of course Kai would have been discovered if he was fighting Xiyong." "You can be sure." "How could Kai have been restrained? An Evanescer cannot be bound." The moment she said the words, he vanished from under her, making her hit the dirt hard. He reappeared a few steps away, but made no move to attack her. "That is the general belief, isn't it?" Xiyong replied, and his voice, his eyes. There was a flash of true fear there, as if he only now realized how easy it would be for his co-conspirator to turn on him in a blink. That sent a bolt of terror straight into Aranya's gut. It took everything in her to keep her composure, to not race back to camp, yelling the entire way about Kai's capture. But she had to deal with the man standing before her. "Kai will be fine. Kai will be fine. He's not gone. He's still alive." "You want Kai free of Fong," she said as coolly as she could manage. "But you don't know how to do it. So, you want my help?" Xiyong lifted one eyebrow, belying the tension in his shoulders. "No. I want to know why he went in the first place." "Use your brain and figure it out yourself. It's obvious as the mud on your face." Meeting her gaze levelly, he reached up with his sleeve and wiped his cheek. "They're planning another assault on the fortress, and they wanted Kai to scout it out for them." Her smile was sweet and sticky. "Look at you." He evanesced to her in a flash, grabbing her jaw and yanking her head up so fast her neck popped. At this angle, she couldn't swallow, but she met his hatred with hers, fury with fury. She wouldn't break under the force of his wrath. "I don't need your patronization. Be glad I've deemed you more valuable alive than dead for now." He caught her wrist before she could plunge her talons into his gut. Never breaking her stare, he growled, "I think I'm finished here." Then he vanished.
"Calm down, Aranya. He's going to be fine. Just sit."
"I'm not sitting down. And stop trying to put that blanket around my shoulders. I'm not panicking. I'm just trying to figure out what we should do. Where's the lieutenant?" Delon gripped both of her shoulders and firmly set her down on the ground.
"Shut up, girl. You're shaking. Sit down and eat a rice cake. Here's some tea. Someone's gone to fetch the lieutenant, and he'll be here shortly. Give me your hand. It's bleeding."
He's trapped, Delon. You said Evanescers can't be bound. Why is he bound? Why can't he escape? She was shaking, enough that her tea kept spilling. Delon managed to get the blanket around her shoulders, despite her multiple attempts to displace it. But she wasn't panicking. She was being rational, trying to understand how they would rescue Kai.
We will find a way to get him out,
Delon said sternly. I know, but we're wasting time here. They could be hurting him, and we're just sitting here all cozy by the fire. We need... She was shoving aside the blanket again, trying to stand, when Delon crouched in front of her, his face hard, and slapped her. Aranya blinked, stunned, her cheek burning. She turned wide eyes up to him, one hand reaching up toward her cheek, but he grabbed both of her wrists and held them firmly.
Get a hold of yourself, girl. You're letting your own fear and emotion get in the way. You're a warrior. Keep your head on straight. This is what serving our country looks like. This is the call of duty. This is what you were trained for. If you lose your head, you're no good. Not to Junning High, and certainly not to Kai, who needs our help. You cannot be overtaken by your anxiety or your impulses. It may feel like we're wasting time, but if we're to have the best chance at rescuing the Evanescer, we need to plan carefully. And that means there will be time spent sitting around and feeling useless. Chin up, little shifter.
She stared at him, her breathing coming in short bursts. His face softened with each heartbeat, enough for her to see his own worry glimmering in his irises. But it did not overcome him. He was still the cool, collected, reliable Delon. She lowered her head into her hands and cried. I'm sorry. You're right. I just don't want him to be hurt.
I know,
Delon said, gripping her shoulder tightly.
Maybe it shocks you to hear, but I don't want him hurt either. Don't give up on him yet. Kai's a bright one, with enough raw talent and skill to be a match for almost anyone. Have a little faith in him. Seven Valleys. I hate it when my wife worries about me. It's like she thinks I'll let myself get killed or something stupid like that.
Aranya's response to that was something like a snort of laughter and a choke of sobs. She dabbed at her eyes, trying to regain control of her breathing.
I don't care about the tears. I've seen plenty of them, said Delon. Between a wife and 3 daughters, there are a lot of tears in my house, and every single one is a crier. You'd have thought with the odds, one of them would be a shouter or a silent pouter. No, indeed not. The worst times are when all 4 are crying at once.
She laughed again, shuddering and sniffling. What's your wife's name?
Genji.
Just then, heavy strides made them look up to see a furious lieutenant marching their way.
What is this I hear? The she-boy has been imprisoned? That's impossible.
Aranya straightened. Beside her, Delon exhaled through his teeth, looked to the heavens, and then turned to greet the lieutenant with a serious countenance. She opened her mouth, about to confirm the lieutenant's statement, but her blood ran cold. Behind the lieutenant, from the dark forest, a tall figure stepped into the glow of the firelight. She knew that form, the shape of those shoulders, the face illuminated by flickers. But she hesitated. It was Kai. It had to be Kai. Wasn't it him? Why wasn't she sure?
Aranya,
came Delon's voice, even as his head turned to follow her gaze.
Your face is as white as...
Kai, she breathed, certain he was too far away to hear her. But his head jerked at the sound of her voice. Kai, she choked. Lieutenant Jadala was the last to turn around and see Kai. He heaved a hefty sigh and waved a hand.
Finally! Come immediately to my tent to report.
Aranya was already scrambling to her feet, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. He was here. He was alive. He was all right. Before she could run to him, Delon grabbed her arm. She twisted, about to growl something, but the heavy warning in his eyes made her stop. Kai said nothing.
Will you answer me, boy?
Snapped the lieutenant.
I require a report.
One moment, Kai was standing, and the next he collapsed into a crumpled heap of long limbs and dark cloak.
Kai!
Aranya twisted, brought her knee up to Delon's gut, and broke free of his hold. He grunted, then snapped,
Get back here, girl. You don't know if—
He's hurt!
she cried, racing past the lieutenant until she reached Kai's fallen body.
Someone get a medic! Kai, can you hear me?
She rolled him over so he lay on his back and jerked involuntarily to find his eyes wide open, fixed on her. For the worst moment of her life, she thought he was dead. But then his eyes drooped closed, and then people were surrounding them and pulling her away.
No, I need to take care of him! Let me go!
Her protests were to no avail. Aranya was dragged away, and Kai was borne off to be examined by the resident medics.
Have him inspected,
the lieutenant was ordering.
The moment he's able to report, tell me.
Chapter 24. Delon was by Aranya's side again, saying things, but it was white noise to her. She stared after the group that carried Kai away, her heart shriveling into a rotten mess of confusion, dread, and anxiety.
Aranya?
I'm fine, Delon, she snapped, pulling away from him. But then she stopped and looked back. His brow was lowered, the lines of his face taut. She sagged and ran a hand down her face. Forgive me, I'm doing it again. I'm not going to lose my head. I'm going to stay rational, and I'm not going to panic. She offered up a little smile, hoping it would mend some of the damage of her short words. He accepted it, giving her a hearty shoulder squeeze and saying,
Get yourself to bed. You can check on him first thing in the morning to see how he's doing.
That was a good idea. It would keep her from waiting around the fire all night for news. She should just go to sleep, and morning would be here before she knew it. Surely he would be in a much better state by tomorrow. She hadn't seen any blood on him, so that had to be a good sign, right? What if it's something more serious? What if there's internal damage I couldn't see, and while I sleep No. She wouldn't think like that. Kai would be fine. She should simply be grateful that he was back safe and sound, no longer imprisoned in that wretched place. Focusing on the crunch of twigs beneath her boots, the cold wind rustling the treetops, and the murmur of the milling people around the camp, she marched to her tent, shivering as she went. What had made her think late afternoon was the perfect time to wash her cloak? It was now too cold for her to strip down to her underthings without the added warmth of her cloak, so the moment she was inside the security of her little tent, she kicked off her boots and wrapped her blanket around her fully clothed self. She unwound her hair, raking her fingers through the long, dark strands to undo the braid. Then, with all the resolve in her heart, the will in her mind, and the determination of her soul, she plopped onto her bedroll, laid down, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, so she knew the moment he appeared inside her tent. Aranya startled, nearly yelping in fright, and scrambled into a sitting position. Her fright was quickly overcome with relief. Kai, are you well? What did the medics say? I have been so worried about you. He said nothing, only stood before her. His robes and tunic were gone, likely due to the medics' inspections, leaving his torso and arms bare. He wore only a pair of trousers to ward off the cold. A chill raced down her spine. Slowly, careful not to startle him, she reached out. Her fingers brushed the hair of his wrist, and a jolt like lightning shot up his arm. Then his fingers entwined with hers, squeezing so hard the muscles in his arm flexed. It was like he feared if he let go, he would be lost forever. He closed his eyes, his face almost shuddering, a contrast to the powerful lines of his body. It's all right, Aranya whispered, reaching up with her other hand so she held his in both of hers. She squeezed his hand back, holding tightly enough that he would know that she wouldn't let go. "You're safe, and you're not alone. You're safe." She ran her thumb down the back of his hand, stroking soothing lines as she repeated those words softly. "You're safe. You're safe. You're safe." What had he endured under Fong's hand? He made no other move as his hand began clenching tighter and tighter around hers. She winced until she was afraid he might actually crush her bones. "Kai," then his eyes changed. His pupils dilated, like a cat's before it pounces. His free hand was moving. It came shooting toward her. Light from nowhere caught a glint. A sharp, lethal glint. A blade. She didn't have time to scream, to make any sound at all. Instinct kicked in, far more reliable than rational thought, and she dove to the side. Fast, but not fast enough. A strange thwump sound. Pain burst behind her eyes, across her scalp. She let out a cry, trying to keep moving, but her neck snapped backward. She was caught. He'd lodged his knife in the bedroll, stabbing straight through her long hair and pinning her. "Kai!" she cried. "What are you doing?" He still held her hand, clutched it so tightly she couldn't begin to free herself. She shifted her free hand into talons, trying to angle backward to cut her hair free of his knife. But then he yanked his knife out. It came plunging for her again. She rolled in the opposite direction, but his grip on her hand restrained her. His knife grazed her shoulder blade, slicing through robes and skin as it sank into the bedroll. This time, she wasn't pinned except by his grip on her hand. Before he could get his knife up again, she leapt to her feet, slid her free arm under his, and pivoted her weight so her back was to him. Using all the momentum and leverage available to someone her size, she grunted and bent, flipping him over her back hard onto the bedroll. It was enough to break his hold on her hand, giving her more freedom. But then he caught her left shoulder and threw her off balance so he could yank her down to him, that knife darting out to slice her neck. Blood roared in her ears, her pulse so frantic she could hardly think. She could only move, only wrestle against his hold. But that knife was coming. Too fast. Leverage. She needed leverage. She had no leverage in this position. He was too big, and without his shirt, there was no disguising the strength rippling through his body. She choked, a pitiful version of a scream. Shift, shift, shift! But if she shifted, she would hurt him. At the last second, Kai rolled, throwing his weight, and instead of piercing her jugular, his knife sliced under her jaw. Another graze, but blood flowed, trickling down her neck as his knife plunged yet again into the bedroll. He was trying to kill her. But he also wasn't? Would that knife ever stop coming for her? He yanked it out of the bedroll and raised it above her head. She snatched her chance, throwing her weight against his arm and wrapping her arms around it. She could attempt to restrain him, but he was stronger, and the last thing she needed was to fight him strength against strength. Instead, she shoved on his arm, maneuvering to his side. With a quick twist, she yanked his arm behind him. "Kai, stop!" she gasped. He vanished. Before she could tell where he reappeared, he clipped her legs out from under her, slamming down hard on her shoulder. She landed against the canvas of her tent, and the flimsy structure buckled around them. No, no, no! She couldn't get tangled up in canvas! Then Kai was over her, his knees braced against her waist, one hand slamming her arm to the ground. He pinned it over her head, his sweaty face only 2 hands' breadths away from hers, a sheen over his muscular chest, and he lifted the knife, ready to plunge it into her heart. But his eyes locked on hers, and there was struggle, a battle, not with her. He gasped, his hand trembling, and then his eyes dilated again, black eclipsing beautiful hazel. Fong got a hold of him. The phoenixes, the siren snare, Zuan Wan's uncuttable bonds, a curse, a compulsion. That knife came plunging toward her. Aranya twisted her wrist free and shoved up, her heart raging in her chest, and wrapped her free arm around Kai's neck. She felt the kiss of steel before the ice of his lips, but didn't pull back, not even when pain sliced into her. She dragged his face to hers, kissing him with all the desperation and fevered hope of midnight and the first blushes of dawn. The tent collapsed around them, and the scratchy, coarse canvas enveloped her as the knife was ripped back. A brief second, Kai kissed her back. Then, in the same breath, a broken sob shattered through the obscuring darkness of the tangle of material. When she expected his kiss to continue, to deepen, he pulled back. For a half-second, he remained where he was, and she could only see the glimmer of his eyes in the black. "Aranya," he choked. I almost... Then he vanished.
There was no place to stop. The moment he evanesced to another dark, empty spot in the woods, nearly ramming into trees or falling into ravines as he did so, his skin itched to be gone. He couldn't stay. Couldn't. He vanished, reappeared, vanished, reappeared. He broke into a run, evanescing around his obstacles instead of altering his course to avoid them. Sweat poured down his face, corrosive rivulets, the only tears he could cry. Away, away, away. Never had he known shackles. Never had his own hand belonged to another. Never had he dreamed he would plunge a knife into her chest. If not for her quick thinking, he would have murdered her and as many of the other warriors as he could in cold blood. He never wanted to hurt her. Now, he knew the depth of his brother's corruption, the heights from which he had fallen. If he would be so treacherous, what would keep him from killing Aranya? A Shu would kill that girl. Whether it was him or Xiyong, one of them would do it. But if he ran, if he vanished into thin air, if he disappeared again, perhaps she could be spared. Perhaps her grandfather would fill the length of his days. Perhaps. A branch hung out in front of him. He evanesced to the other side, then to the far side of the tree it hung from. Nothing would stop him. Nothing would bind him again. He would keep himself and the disaster that followed in his wake away from her. Evanescing can't solve all your problems, boy. Qigong's words flashed through his mind, quick as lightning, and just as distracting. Kai tripped over a tree root and was too stunned by those words, he didn't even evanesce away to prevent his fall. Instead, he landed smack on his face in the dirt. Inhale, exhale. The world was quiet around him. The pregnant stillness of a forest at midnight. The softness of a predator lying in wait for its prey. He breathed, hands planted flat on the ground. Evanescing can't solve all your problems. In, out. Fire. No, not fire. Smoke. He smelled smoke. Slowly, he lifted his head. Not 3 paces away, an obsidian dragon stared at him. Its large, cat-like eyes gleamed like marbles, too glassy to be real. Smoke trailed from its nostrils, curling into the dense foliage and obscuring Kai's view of the moon. The dragon did not move. Its haunches tensed, however. Its wings weren't tucked into its side, but lifted and half-folded, ready for flight or attack. Kai watched the pupils of those golden eyes widen, constrict into slivers, then widen again, oscillating. Kai lowered his brow. Angrily, he pushed off his arms, standing up. The dragon skittered back a few paces, its eyes dilating and wings spreading further. It opened its mouth, spitting a few hisses. "What?" Kai asked, raising an eyebrow. "You think I'm going to eat you? Don't flatter yourself." With a sweep of his cloak, he evanesced away.
What happened?
A wielder Aranya hadn't met yet asked as he pulled the canvas off her.
Some crazy nightmare?
She pursed her lips, quickly wrapping herself up in her blanket and pressing a hand over the throbbing wound in her chest. It wasn't deep, but it was enough to bleed and hurt. A nightmare indeed, she mumbled in response. He didn't ask further questions, just helped her reassemble the tent and offered a few stupid jokes about not tearing down the rest of the camp when she went back to sleep. "I'll try," she said. "Thank you." Once alone, with her hands shaking, she retrieved her set of bandages and set to work, binding up the shallow wound on her chest. The others were such hairline cuts they'd already stopped bleeding. Kai had fought the compulsion with everything in him. The little cuts attested to that. If he hadn't fought it, he would have killed her thrice over. Where had he gone? At least she had broken his curse with her kiss. He should be free now, and he was free from Fong. That would be enough, right? She finished the bandage, readjusted her clothes, and then sat on the edge of the bedroll. She stared into the dark corners of her tent, not even sure what to think. And then there was Kai.